Worthless? Is that what you really think of me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper as I stared at my son across his gleaming mahogany desk. Darius didn't even look up from his computer screen, his fingers continuing to tap away at the keyboard. The afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office at Pinnacle Developments, illuminating his custom-tailored suit and the family photo where his smile looked nothing like the cold expression he wore. Now, before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Mom, I've got investors waiting. I don't have time for another one of your lectures about the old ways of doing business, he said, finally glancing up with impatience etched across his face. The market doesn't care about your outdated methods anymore. It's not personal. It's evolution. I should have felt anger, or at least hurt, but instead I felt an odd sense of calm as I reached for my handbag. Inside was the document I'd signed. Just 3 hours earlier, the mortgage transfer agreement for the Obsidian Tower, Darius's most ambitious development project to date. He had no idea I now held the power to foreclose on his crowning achievement, the very symbol of his success that he'd thrown in my face countless times. I understand, I said, rising from my chair. I won't take any more of your valuable time. As I walked toward the door, he called after me, Mom, wait. The family dinner on Sunday. Imara's expecting you. I turned, a small smile playing at my lips. Don't worry, I'll be there. Some things are worth showing up for. He had already returned to his screen, dismissing me from his thoughts as quickly as he'd dismissed my worth. But that was fine. I had something he didn't: patience, and the mortgage to his future. I never imagined that at 62, I'd be starting over. But life has a funny way of pulling the rug out from under you, especially when the hands doing the pulling belong to your own flesh and blood. My name is Thalia Merritt, and for 35 years I built Nautilus Financial Group from a small mortgage brokerage into one of Crescent Harbor's most respected financial institutions. I started the company when Darius was just a baby, working from a converted closet in our tiny apartment after my husband walked out, claiming he wasn't cut out for fatherhood. Those early years were a blur of childcare, client meetings, and falling asleep over spreadsheets, but I managed to carve out a niche specializing in financing historical property restorations along our city's once-neglected waterfront. When other lenders saw only risk in those crumbling Victorian mansions and abandoned warehouses, I saw opportunity. I created custom financing packages that made restoration projects viable, and one by one, the forgotten gems of Crescent Harbor began to shine again. The Meridian District, once a collection of derelict buildings, transformed into the beating heart of our city's cultural renaissance. And I was proud to have played a part in that transformation. Darius grew up watching me build something from nothing. As a teenager, he'd sit in on client meetings, absorbing everything. "You're brilliant, Mom," he used to say, his eyes wide with admiration. "The way you structured that deal? Genius." Those words meant everything to me. I wasn't just building a business. I was creating a legacy for my son. At 25, fresh out of business school, Darius joined Nautilus. I gave him his own division focused on commercial real estate, and he thrived. Within 5 years, his department was generating almost 40% of our revenue. I couldn't have been prouder. "We make a great team," I told him on his 30th birthday as we celebrated on the rooftop of the Meridian Hotel, a building we'd helped finance. "Someday, all of this will be yours." He clinked his champagne glass against mine, grinning. Why wait for someday? I should have recognized the ambition in his eyes for what it was, but mothers see what they want to see. The following Monday, Darius called an emergency board meeting. I arrived to find printed proposals on every seat, a comprehensive restructuring plan with his name as CEO and mine as founding advisor. a ceremonial title with no real power. The market is changing, he explained to the room, not even meeting. My eyes. We need to pivot toward large-scale development financing. The restoration market is saturated, margins are shrinking, and we're missing opportunities in new construction. I sat frozen as he outlined his vision for Nautilus, a vision that systematically dismantled everything I'd built. The personal relationships with clients, the customized approach to financing, the commitment to preserving Crescent Harbor's architectural heritage, all sacrificed on the altar of rapid growth and higher profits. This is a mistake, I finally said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Our reputation is built on our specialty. We're not equipped to compete with multinational banks in generic development financing. Darius smiled tightly. With all due respect, Mother, that's exactly the kind of thinking that's holding us back. The numbers speak for themselves. And they did. His projections showed potential growth that made several board members raise their eyebrows in appreciation. I'd assembled our board carefully over the years, choosing people who shared my vision and values. But values, it seemed, were flexible when faced with the prospect of doubling their returns. The vote was 7-4 in favor of Darius's plan. My own company slipping through my fingers in a single afternoon. This is for the best, Darius assured me afterward, his hand on my shoulder feeling more like a weight than a comfort. You've done amazing work getting us here, but it's time to let me take it to the next level. You can still be involved, just in a different capacity. That different capacity quickly became clear. My office was relocated from the executive floor to a windowless room near accounting. My client meetings were rescheduled or reassigned. My emails went unanswered. Within months, I was effectively sidelined in the company I had founded. I watched as Darius systematically replaced our longtime staff with his business school connections. Young, aggressive types who viewed our clients as numbers rather than people. The Nautilus culture I'd carefully cultivated, based on integrity and personal service, was dismantled piece by piece. The final straw came when Darius landed the financing contract for the Obsidian Tower, a massive glass and steel monstrosity planned for the heart of the Meridian District. The project would require demolishing the Harrington Building, a historic Art Deco masterpiece that had been one of my first restoration projects 20 years earlier. I confronted him in his office, waving the demolition permit. You can't do this. That building is part of the city's protected architectural heritage. Darius barely looked up from his laptop. The protection was provisional, and the city council voted to revoke it last week. The economic impact of the Obsidian Tower outweighs the value of preserving one old building. That old building is part of what makes the Meridian District special, I argued. It's why people come here, why businesses want to locate here. If we tear down our history to build generic towers, what's left? He sighed, finally meeting my eyes with a look of thinly veiled impatience. Mom, I appreciate your sentimentality, but this is business. The Obsidian project will generate more revenue for Nautilus in 3 years than your restoration loans did in 20. Times change. Our clients will push back on this, I warned. The relationships we've built. Our clients care about returns, not aesthetics, he cut in. And those who don't will be replaced by clients who do. That's how business works. I stared at my son, hardly recognizing the person he'd become. That's not how my business works. His expression hardened. Well, it's not your business anymore, is it? The words hit me like a physical blow. I stepped back, steadying myself against the doorframe. I think it's time we discuss your retirement, Darius continued, his tone softening slightly. You've earned it, Mom. 35 years is a long time. Think about it. You could travel, relax, enjoy life without the stress of work. I enjoy my work, I said quietly. It gives me purpose. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'm sure we can find you something purposeful to do. Maybe a position on a charitable foundation? Something low-key but meaningful? I left, his office in a daze, wandering through the halls of Nautilus like a ghost. Employees I'd known for years averted their eyes, already sensing which way the wind was blowing. By the time I reached my cramped office, my shock had transformed into something else, determination. That evening, I called Keone Wakefield, an old friend and client who had become one of Crescent Harbor's most successful real estate attorneys. We met at his home in Halcyon Bay, away from prying eyes and ears. "He's trying to force me out," I told Keone, pacing across his living room as waves crashed against the cliffs below. "My own son is erasing everything I've built." Keone listened quietly, his weathered face thoughtful. At 70, he'd seen his share of family business implosions. "What do you want to do, Thalia? Fight or walk away?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I stopped pacing and looked out at the darkening ocean. "I don't know. He's my son. Even now, I can't bear the thought of hurting him." "Even though he's hurting you?" Keone asked gently. I didn't answer immediately. The truth was complicated. Yes, Darius was dismantling my life's work, but wasn't that the natural order of things? Children grow up, make their own decisions, forge their own paths. Maybe this was just the painful evolution of succession. Perhaps I should just retire. Gracefully, I murmured. Let him have the company. Maybe I'm just holding on to the past. Keone rose from his chair and joined me at the window. Is that really what you think? Or is that what Darius has convinced you to think? His question cut through my confusion. What do you mean? I mean, Keone said carefully, that I've known you for 30 years, Thalia. You've never been afraid of change or innovation. What you've always stood against is sacrificing ethics for profit. There's a difference between evolution and betrayal. His words resonated with something deep inside me. Yes, businesses had to adapt, but not at the cost of their soul. Nautilus had always balanced profit with purpose. That wasn't outdated thinking, it was principled leadership. The Obsidian Tower project, Keone continued, isn't just about a building. It's about what kind of city we want to create, what kind of legacy we leave. And I think that matters to you. It did matter. It had always mattered. So I ask again, he said, turning to face me. What do you want to do? I took a deep breath. I want to protect what I've built, not just the company, but the vision behind it. I want to show Darius that there's a better way forward than just chasing the biggest deal. Keone nodded, a slow smile spreading across his face. Then I think we need a strategy, not a surrender. Over the next several hours, fueled by coffee and decades of combined experience, we formulated a plan. It wasn't about wresting control back from Darius. That ship had sailed. It was about creating something new, something that would honor the principles that had guided Nautilus from the beginning. By dawn, I had the outline of my next chapter. I would start a new boutique firm focused exclusively on heritage restoration and community development in Crescent Harbor's neglected neighborhoods, areas that were now being eyed by developers like my son for gentrification projects that would displace longtime residents. It's risky, Keone warned. You'll be directly competing with Nautilus in some ways, and Darius won't take that lightly. I'm not doing this to spite him, I said firmly. I'm doing it because it's necessary, because if I don't, parts of our city and its history will be lost forever. Keone studied me for a moment, then nodded. All right then, let's get to work. The next morning, I walked into Nautilus for what would be one of my last times as an employee. I requested a meeting with Darius, and to my surprise, he agreed to see me right away. I've been thinking about what you said, I told him, settling into the chair across from his desk. About retirement. His expression brightened. That's great, Mom. I think you'll find— I'm resigning from Nautilus, I interrupted, effective immediately. Darius blinked, clearly thrown by my directness. Well, that's good. A clean break is probably best. We'll put together a nice retirement package for you. Something generous to acknowledge your contributions. I'm not retiring, I clarified. I'm starting a new venture, Heritage Capital. We'll specialize in financing restoration projects and community development in underserved neighborhoods. The color drained from his face. You're competing with us? With your own company? I'm continuing the work I've always believed in, I corrected him. Work that Nautilus no longer seems interested in pursuing. Darius leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening. This is about the Obsidian Tower, isn't it? You just can't accept progress. This is about much more than one building, I said calmly. It's about values, Darius, about remembering that business decisions affect real people and real communities. He scoffed. Save the lecture for your memoir, Mom. If you want to waste your retirement years on some boutique vanity project, that's your business. But don't expect any favors from Nautilus. I'd never ask for any, I assured him, rising to my feet. Just honoring existing commitments would be sufficient. As I turned to leave, Darius called after me, his voice laced with a dismissiveness that stung more than anger would have. You know this won't work, right? The market has moved on from your old-fashioned approach. You'll be irrelevant within a year. I paused at the door, looking back at him, at the son I'd raised alone. The boy who once looked at me with admiration rather than derision. We'll see, was all I said. Walking out of Nautilus that day was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Not because I was afraid of the future. I'd faced uncertainty before and survived. No. What hurt was leaving behind the dream that Darius and I would build something meaningful together, that my legacy would live on through him. But as I drove home that evening, watching the sun set over Crescent Harbor's distinctive skyline, a skyline I'd helped shape through decades of careful financing decisions, I felt something unexpected: freedom. The weight of trying to preserve my vision within a company that no longer shared it had been lifted. Now I could pursue that vision without compromise. The next few months were a whirlwind. With Keone's help, I secured modest office space in the Meridian District, just 2 blocks from the threatened Harrington building. I reached out to former clients and colleagues, explaining my new venture. Many were relieved to hear that someone was still championing restoration and community-focused development in Crescent Harbor. 3 of my most experienced loan officers from Nautilus resigned to join me, along with a half-dozen other staff who shared my vision. Darius was furious, accusing me of poaching talent, but I hadn't solicited anyone. They had come to me, disillusioned by the changes at Nautilus. You think anyone would choose to work with a has-been if there were better options? Darius snapped during a tense encounter at a city business forum. They'll come crawling back when your little experiment fails. His words hurt, but I didn't let it show. They're adults making professional choices, Darius, just as you did. This isn't a game, Mother, he hissed, lowering his voice as others approached. You're undermining everything I'm trying to build. No, I corrected him gently. I'm building something different. There's room in this city for more than one approach. He walked away without another word, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the anger in his stride. My son had always been competitive, even as a child. Having me as a perceived opponent rather than an ally was clearly eating at him. Despite Darius's predictions of failure, Heritage Capital found its footing quickly. Our first major project was financing the restoration of the old Watermark Theater in the Seaview District, a once vibrant neighborhood that had fallen on hard times. The theater had been shuttered for decades, but a local arts collective had a vision to transform it into a community cultural center. Traditional lenders, including Nautilus under Darius's leadership, had turned them down. The numbers, on paper, didn't work. But I saw beyond the spreadsheets to the potential impact on the neighborhood. How a restored theater could become an anchor for revitalization, attracting small businesses and breathing new life into struggling streets. We structured a creative financing package that included historic preservation tax credits, community investment funds, and a modest loan from Heritage. 6 months later, when the renovated marquee of the Watermark lit up for the first time in 30 years, the entire neighborhood celebrated. Local news covered the opening night, and I found myself being interviewed about Heritage Capital's innovative approach to community-centered financing. The success of the Watermark project brought more opportunities our way. Within a year, Heritage Capital was involved in a dozen restoration and community development projects across Crescent Harbor's older neighborhoods. Our reputation grew, and with it, our influence in the city's development discussions. Meanwhile, the Obsidian Tower project that had precipitated my departure from Nautilus hit unexpected snags. Community opposition to the demolition of the Harrington building had grown more organized, with preservation groups filing lawsuits and staging protests. Construction delays mounted, and costs began to spiral. I took no pleasure in Darius's struggles with the project, but I couldn't deny feeling vindicated that my concerns had been well-founded. The community valued its architectural heritage more than he had anticipated. Still, I kept Heritage Capital separate from the controversy, focusing on our own projects rather than engaging in the battle over the Obsidian Tower. That changed the day I received a call from Zephyr Blackwood, the developer behind the Obsidian project and Darius's most important client. "Ms. Merritt," his smooth voice purred through my phone. "I wonder if we might meet to discuss a matter of mutual interest." Curious despite my misgivings, I agreed to have lunch with him at Vantage Point, an upscale restaurant perched on the cliffs overlooking the harbor. Zephyr was waiting when I arrived, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, rising slightly as I approached. "I followed your work with Heritage Capital with great interest." "Have you?" I responded evenly, taking my seat. "I wouldn't have thought our community-focused projects would be on your radar." He smiled, a practiced expression that never reached his eyes. "I make it my business to know all the players in Crescent Harbor's development scene. And you, Ms. Merritt, have become quite a significant player again." After pleasantries and ordering, Zephyr got to the point. "The Obsidian Tower project has encountered some resistance. Unexpected resistance." "I've read the news," I acknowledged. "What you may not know," he continued, swirling his wine, "is that your son's company has overextended itself on this project. The financing structure is precarious. These delays and legal challenges are creating serious problems." I felt a flicker of concern. "Why are you telling me this?" Zephyr leaned forward. "Because you have influence in this city, particularly with the preservation community. A word from you could help ease some of the opposition we're facing." "You want me to help push through a project I fundamentally disagree with?" I clarified. "I want you to help your son," Zephyr corrected. "Because if this project fails, Nautilus Financial will take a significant hit. A hit that could be catastrophic given their current leveraged position." My heartbeat quickened. "How leveraged?" Zephyr named a figure that made my blood run cold. Darius had apparently gambled almost everything on the Obsidian Tower's success, extending credit and guarantees far beyond what I would have considered prudent. "That's reckless," I managed to say. "It's ambitious," Zephyr countered, "and it would have paid off handsomely if not for these delays. Your son is a visionary, Ms. Merritt. Perhaps too much of one for Crescent Harbor's conservative tastes." I studied him carefully. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A compromise," he said smoothly. We incorporate elements of the Harrington Building's facade into the Obsidian design. Preserve some of the character that people seem so attached to, while still moving forward with the development. All we need is for you to publicly support this compromise. The offer was tempting in one respect. It could potentially save Darius from financial disaster, but it would also mean betraying my own principles and the trust of those who believed in Heritage Capital's mission. I'll need to think about it, I said finally. Zephyr smiled again, clearly interpreting my response as eventual acquiescence. Of course, take your time, but not too much time. The project's financing has certain timelines attached. As I drove back to my office, my mind raced. If what Zephyr said was true, Darius had put Nautilus, my life's work, at risk for this single project. The thought made me physically ill. Despite everything, I couldn't bear to see him fail so catastrophically. Yet supporting the Obsidian Tower went against everything I believed in. That evening, I tried calling Darius, but he didn't answer. I left a careful message, asking him to call me back about an important matter regarding the Obsidian project. Hours passed with no response. Finally, around 9 o'clock, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Darius standing there, his expression a mixture of anger and exhaustion. "What do you want, Mom?" he demanded, brushing past me into the house, without waiting for an invitation. "And how do you know about any problems with the Obsidian project?" "Zephyr Blackwood approached me today," I said, closing the door. "He seems to think I can help smooth things over with the preservation groups." Darius's face tightened. "Zephyr should mind his own business. We don't need your help." "Are you sure about that?" I asked quietly. "Because he gave me some numbers that suggest Nautilus is in a very precarious position if this project fails." "He had no right to share that information with you," Darius exploded. "You're not part of Nautilus anymore. You chose to walk away." "I'm still your mother," I reminded him, "and I still care what happens to the company I built." "The company you built," he repeated mockingly. "Always about your legacy, isn't it? Never mind that I'm trying to build something bigger, something that will actually last in today's market." "By gambling everything on one project?" I challenged. "By leveraging the company to the hilt? That's not building, Darius. That's risking everything your grandparents and parents worked for." He paced across my living room, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "You don't understand. The Obsidian Tower isn't just another project. It's a statement. It puts Nautilus and Crescent Harbor on the map. It changes everything, including demolishing an important piece of the city's architectural heritage," I pointed out. Darius whirled on me. "That's exactly why I didn't want your input. You're so obsessed with the past that you can't see the future. This city needs to evolve, Mom. It needs bold vision, not sentimental attachment to old buildings." The past and future aren't mutually exclusive," I argued. "The most vibrant cities in the world honor their heritage while embracing innovation. That balance is what makes them special." He shook his head dismissively. "Save the lecture. I didn't come here for another lesson on your outdated business philosophy." The contempt in his voice stung. This wasn't my little boy anymore. This was a stranger wearing my son's face. A stranger who saw my life's work as irrelevant, my wisdom as outdated, my concerns as obstacles to overcome. "Why did you come then?" I asked softly. Darius stopped, pacing, suddenly looking weary. "To ask you to stay out of this. Whatever Zephyr is planning, whatever he asked you to do, just stay out of it. This is my project, my company now. I'll handle it my way." "Even if that means risking everything," I pressed. "It's mine to risk," he snapped. Then, seeing my expression, he moderated his tone. "Look, Mom, I appreciate your concern. Really, but I've got this under control. The preservation issue will blow over. People will see the benefits of the Obsidian Tower once it's completed. I wasn't convinced, but I could see that pushing further would only widen the rift between us. All right, I conceded. I won't interfere. Relief washed over his face. Thank you. He checked his watch. I should go. I have an early meeting tomorrow. At the door, he hesitated, then gave me an awkward, brief hug. Try not to worry, Mom. Everything's going to work out. After he left, I sat alone in my living room, replaying our conversation. There had been something in his eyes when he talked about the project, a desperation beneath the confidence. Zephyr. Blackwood's warning echoed in my mind. If the Obsidian Tower failed, Nautilus could collapse with it. I couldn't let that happen. Not to the company I'd built, and not to my son. But I also couldn't compromise my principles or Heritage Capital's mission. There had to be another way. That night, I called Keone again. I need to see the financial structure of the Obsidian Tower project, I told him. All of it, the loans, the guarantees, the timelines, everything. Keone was silent for a moment. That's highly confidential information, Thalia. Not something I can just pull up for you. I know, I acknowledged. But if the project is as over-leveraged as I've been led to believe, there might be a genuine risk to the city's financial ecosystem. You're on the Financial Oversight Committee. Surely that gives you some access. He sighed. I'll see what I can find out. Legally, he emphasized. But Thalia, what are you planning to do with this information? I stared out at the darkness, beyond my window at the distant lights of the city I loved. I'm not sure yet, but I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with before I decide. 3 days later, Keone arrived at my house with a thick folder. I called in some favors, he said grimly, and what I found isn't good. Over the next several hours, we pored over the financial documents. What emerged was a picture more troubling than even Zephyr had suggested. Darius had restructured Nautilus to bet everything on the Obsidian Tower's success. If the project failed, the company wouldn't just take a hit, it could face bankruptcy. How could he do this? I whispered, staring at the numbers in disbelief. How could the board allow it? Keone shook his head. The board has been gradually replaced with Darius's allies. They trusted his vision completely. And on paper, the returns looked extraordinary if everything went according to plan. Which it hasn't, I noted. No, Keone agreed. The preservation lawsuits alone have added months of delays and millions in legal fees. And there's something else. He hesitated. What? I pressed. The construction loans have an acceleration clause. If the project isn't completed by the end of next quarter, the entire amount becomes due immediately. Nautilus can't cover that without selling off major assets. My heart sank. So Darius wasn't exaggerating. Everything really is at stake. Keone nodded solemnly. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I spent a sleepless night considering my options. I could publicly support Zephyr's compromise, potentially helping to save Nautilus but compromising my own principles. I could do nothing, letting events unfold naturally, even if that meant watching my son and my former company crash and burn. Or there was a third option, a riskier one, but perhaps the only way to both save Nautilus and stay true to my values. The next morning, I made my decision. I called my bank and arranged to liquidate a significant portion of my personal investments, including my retirement fund. Then I contacted a specialized lender I'd worked with years ago, one who dealt with distressed debt acquisition. By the end of the week, I had a proposal. It was risky, financially and personally, but it offered a path forward that I could live with. All that remained was to implement it quietly, before Darius or Zephyr could intervene. What I didn't anticipate was being summoned to Pinnacle Developments, Darius's real estate company, the following Monday. I arrived to find him pacing his office, agitation visible in every line of his body. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" he demanded the moment his assistant closed the door behind me. "Did you think Zephyr wouldn't tell me what you're trying to do?" I remained calm. "And what exactly am I trying to do, Darius?" "You're trying to buy the construction debt on the Obsidian Tower," he said accusingly. "You're positioning yourself to take control of the project if it defaults. My own mother stabbing me in the back." So Zephyr had gotten wind of my maneuvers. That was unfortunate, but not entirely unexpected in Crescent Harbor's interconnected business community. "I'm trying to create options," I corrected him. "Options that might save Nautilus without compromising the city's architectural heritage." "By undermining me?" he exclaimed. "By going behind my back to buy up debt so you can swoop in and take over if I fail?" "No," I said firmly. "By ensuring that if there is a default, the debt doesn't fall into the hands of vulture investors who would dismantle Nautilus for parts. I'm trying to protect what I built, Darius. And yes, protect you too, whether you want that protection or not." He laughed bitterly. "Protect me? By treating me like an incompetent child who needs his mother to clean up his messes?" "Is that how you see this?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. "Darius, you've put Nautilus in an incredibly vulnerable position. If the Obsidian project fails—" "It won't fail!" he shouted, slamming his hand down on his desk. "It can't fail. I won't let it." The desperation in his voice confirmed what I'd suspected. He was in too deep, too committed to consider any alternative path. "And what if it does?" I pressed gently. "What's your contingency plan?" His silence was answer enough. There was no plan B. "This is why I'm acting," I explained. "Not to undermine you, but to make sure there's a safety net if things don't go as planned." Darius shook his head, his expression hardening. "I don't want your safety net. I don't need it. What I need is for you to stop interfering in my business." "Nautilus was my business for 35 years, I reminded him. "I have every right to try to preserve it." "No," he said coldly. "You gave up that right when you walked away to start Heritage Capital. You chose to compete with me rather than support me. You chose your precious old buildings over your own son." His words twisted the knife that had been lodged in my heart since our split. Had I chosen buildings over my son? Had my principles been worth the rift between us? "That's not fair," I said quietly. "I've always supported you, Darius. But supporting you doesn't mean I have to agree with every decision you make, especially when those decisions threaten everything we built together." "There is no we anymore," he said flatly. "There's just me trying to build something significant, and you trying to hold me back with your outdated ideas and sentimental attachments." I stared at my son, trying to reconcile this cold, dismissive man with the enthusiastic boy who had once hung on my every word. Where had I lost him? When had ambition eclipsed the values I thought I'd instilled? "Is that really what you think of me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "That I'm just a relic holding you back? That my experience, my knowledge, my concern for this city and its people, that it's all worthless?" Darius didn't answer immediately. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Doubt, perhaps, or a glimmer of the sun I remembered. But it vanished quickly, replaced by a hard, determined look. "Worthless is a harsh word," he said finally. "But yes, in today's market, with what I'm trying to achieve, your cautious, small-thinking approach is a liability, not an asset. The world has moved beyond your way of doing business, Mom. It's time you accepted that." The word hung in the air between us. Worthless. Each step away from Darius's office felt heavier than the last. The security guard nodded politely as I passed through the marble lobby of Pinnacle Developments, unaware that my world had just shattered. Outside, Crescent Harbor's signature sea breeze hit my face, but I barely felt it. Worthless. The word echoed in my mind, drowning out the sounds of traffic and pedestrians around me. I made it to my car before the tears came. Not loud, dramatic, sobs, but quiet, dignified droplets that tracked silently down my cheeks. 35 years of building something meaningful, of mentoring countless professionals, of helping revitalize entire neighborhoods, all dismissed as irrelevant by my own flesh and blood. I didn't drive home. Instead, I found myself winding along the coastal road toward Lantern Point, a quiet cliffside park overlooking the harbor. It had been my thinking spot since Darius was small. On difficult days, I'd bring him here, and we'd count ships while I mentally sorted through whatever challenge Nautilus was facing. The wooden bench was still there, weathered by decades of salt air but sturdy. I sat down, watching gulls circle over the water far below. The city skyline stretched across the horizon, a blend of historic structures and modern edifices, each telling part of Crescent Harbor's story. The Harrington building's Art Deco silhouette stood out among the glass towers, elegant and irreplaceable. "I thought I might find you here," a voice said. I turned to see Keone approaching, hands tucked into the pockets of his worn leather jacket. Despite his 70 years, he moved with the ease of someone who made daily hikes a priority. "How did... you know?" I asked, making room on the bench. "Where else would you go to lick your wounds?" He settled beside me. "Larissa at Heritage said you missed your afternoon meetings. That's not like you." I nodded toward the skyline. "I came to remind myself what I've been fighting for." "And what's that?" I gestured to the panorama before us. Balance, harmony, progress that doesn't erase history. Development that lifts communities rather than displacing them. I sighed. All the things Darius now considers worthless. Keone's eyebrows shot up. He said that? In so many words. I recounted our confrontation, each syllable of Darius's dismissal still razor-sharp in my memory. Keone was quiet for a long moment, gazing out at the harbor. "What will you do now?" he finally asked. It was the question I'd been avoiding since leaving Pinnacle. My initial plan, to acquire the Obsidian, Tower's debt as a safety net, now felt insufficient. Darius had made it clear he wouldn't accept my help, wouldn't acknowledge the danger his approach posed to Nautilus, wouldn't recognize that his ambition had blinded him to unnecessary risks. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to walk away completely. Let him learn the hard way." "But?" Keone prompted. "But he's still my son, and Nautilus is still..." I trailed off, unable to finish. "Still yours," Keone completed the thought, "no matter whose name is on the letterhead." I nodded, grateful for his understanding. "Also, it's not just about Darius anymore. If Nautilus collapses, dozens of people lose their jobs. Projects across the city lose financing. The ripple effects could be devastating. So walking away isn't an option," Keone concluded. "No. But neither is compromising on what matters." We sat in companionable silence, watching the afternoon light shift across the water. The solution, when it finally crystallized in my mind, was so obvious I almost laughed. "I'm going to buy the mortgage," I said aloud, testing the idea in the open air. Keone turned to me, brow furrowed. "You already said you were purchasing the construction debt." "Not that. The actual mortgage on the Obsidian Tower land, the property itself." Understanding dawned on his face. "The development loan is separate from the land financing?" I nodded, excitement building as the plan took shape. "They're structured as separate instruments. Zephyr Blackwood's company owns the land, with a mortgage through Eastern Continental Bank. Nautilus provided the development financing through a consortium. And if you owned the mortgage on the land," Keone mused, "I'd have leverage without directly interfering with the development financing," I confirmed. "It's a position of influence, not control. If the project succeeds, Fine. If not, I have options to protect what matters. Keone considered this, his legal mind undoubtedly running through potential complications. Eastern Continental won't sell a performing mortgage without a compelling reason. They will if the offer is right, I said. And I have connections. There from my Nautilus days. Patricia Montrose still heads their commercial division. It would require significant capital, he warned. I have savings, and my Nautilus shares still have value, at least for now. You'd sacrifice your retirement security for a son who just called your life's work worthless? I turned to face the city again, the skyline I'd helped shape, the communities I'd helped strengthen. Not for Darius, I said quietly. For Nautilus. For the people who still work there. For the city we all love. And yes, for my son too, even if he doesn't understand why yet. Keone nodded slowly. All right. If you're sure this is what you want, I'll help you structure the purchase properly. The next morning, I called Patricia Montrose at Eastern Continental Bank. Our history together gave me a direct line. No secretaries, no schedulers, just two old colleagues who'd navigated Crescent. Harbor's financial evolution together for decades. Thalia, she greeted me warmly. To what do I owe the pleasure? Calling to gloat about the Watermark Theater's success? I smiled despite myself. The Watermark had been Heritage Capital's first major triumph, a project Eastern Continental had declined to finance. No gloating today, Patricia. I'm calling about a delicate matter. The Obsidian Tower project. There was a brief pause. Ah, your son's flagship development, the one replacing the Harrington building. That's the one. I understand Eastern Continental holds the mortgage on the underlying property. We do, she confirmed, her tone turning careful. Though I'm surprised you're inquiring, given your public position on historical preservation. I'd like to discuss acquiring that mortgage, I said directly, privately and confidentially. The silence that followed told me I'd genuinely surprised her, a feat not easily accomplished with a banking veteran like Patricia. That's an unusual request, she said finally. The mortgage is performing. Blackwood Development is current on all payments. There's no reason for us to sell. I understand, but every asset has its price, Patricia. I'm prepared to make an attractive offer. Another pause. May I ask why? Given your known opposition to the project, this seems counterintuitive. I chose my words carefully. Let's just say I have concerns about the project's long-term viability. Concerns that make holding this particular mortgage position valuable to me. I see. Her voice was non-committal, but I could hear the wheels turning. Patricia had been in banking long enough to read between lines. And you're approaching us directly rather than through Heritage Capital? This would be a personal investment, I clarified, completely separate from Heritage. I understand, she said, though I doubted she truly did. How could anyone understand the complex tangle of maternal concern, professional pride, and civic duty driving my decisions? I'll need to discuss this with our commercial lending committee. It's not a typical transaction. I appreciate that. And Patricia, discretion is paramount here. Of course, she hesitated. Thalia, off the record. Is there something about this project I should know? Something that might affect Eastern Continental's position? It was a fair question. Patricia and I had always been straight with each other, even when representing competing interests. Nothing concrete, I assured her. Just hedging against possibilities. All right, she said, not entirely convinced. I'll be in touch within 48 hours. Patricia was true to her word. The following afternoon, she called with terms for the mortgage purchase. The premium was steep, 15% above face value, but not prohibitive. I would need to liquidate most of my personal investments, including the Nautilus shares I'd held since founding the company. But the numbers worked. You're sure about this? Patricia asked when I accepted without negotiation. Once the paperwork is signed, there's no turning back. I'm sure, I said firmly. How quickly can we close? Given the size of the transaction and the unusual nature, I'd estimate 2 weeks for all approvals and documentation. 2 weeks. That should be enough time, assuming no major developments at the Obsidian Tower site. That works, I agreed. And Patricia? I'm counting on your discretion until this is completed. You have my word, she promised. Though I admit, I'm curious to see how this plays out. That made 2 of us. The next 14 days were among the most stressful of my career. I maintained my regular schedule at Heritage Capital, reviewed community development proposals, met with clients, and gave no indication that anything unusual was happening. Meanwhile, I liquidated investments, transferred funds, and prepared for the mortgage acquisition, all while watching the Obsidian Tower situation from a distance. Construction had resumed after a brief hiatus following the preservation lawsuits, but progress was slower than projected. Each morning on my drive to work, I passed the site, noting how little changed from day to day. The Harrington building stood wrapped in construction barriers, its fate still undetermined despite Darius's victory in court. On day 12 of my 2-week waiting period, my phone rang with a call from an unexpected source, Imara, Darius's wife. Thalia? I hope I'm not interrupting. Her voice had its usual composed quality, but I detected an undercurrent of tension. Not at all, Imara. What can I do for you? I was hoping we might have lunch tomorrow. There's something I'd like to discuss. She paused. It's about Darius. My pulse quickened. Had she learned about my plans? Had Darius? Of course, I said, keeping my tone even. Shall we meet at Meridian Bistro? Say, 1 o'clock? That would be perfect. Thank you, Thalia. The call ended, leaving me with a knot of anxiety. Imara and I had always maintained a cordial relationship, but we weren't particularly close. She was brilliant, a corporate attorney who had met Darius during a financing deal, but reserved, keeping a careful distance from the tensions between her husband and me. For her to reach out independently was unusual. I called Keone immediately. We need to accelerate the closing, I told him without preamble. Imara wants to meet with me tomorrow. Something's happening. I'll call Patricia, he promised. But Thalia, even with pressure, these transactions take time. The earliest I could possibly close would be day after tomorrow. Then that's what we need to aim for, I said. Whatever it takes. Meridian Bistro occupied the ground floor of a beautifully restored Victorian in the heart of the district I'd helped revitalize. The hostess led me to a quiet corner table where Imara already waited, elegant as always in a tailored navy suit, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek chignon. Thank you for meeting me, she said as I took my seat. Of course. I studied her face, searching for clues. Is everything all right? Imara glanced around to ensure we weren't overheard, then leaned forward slightly. No, it isn't. Darius is in trouble, Thalia. Serious trouble. My stomach tightened. The Obsidian Tower? She nodded. The project is imploding. Cost overruns, construction delays, investor nervousness. Zephyr Blackwood is threatening to pull out entirely. That would be catastrophic for Nautilus, I observed, carefully maintaining a neutral expression. Yes. Imara's perfectly manicured fingers twisted the napkin in her lap, the only visible sign of her distress. But it's worse than that. Darius has been cutting corners, taking risks to keep the project afloat. What kind of risks? She hesitated, the attorney in her clearly battling with the wife's concern. He's been moving funds between accounts to cover shortfalls, using client escrow money temporarily. Nothing has been permanently misappropriated, she hastened to add. But it's a dangerous game. If regulators found out... I closed my eyes, briefly, absorbing the implications. This wasn't just financial trouble anymore. This was potentially criminal. My son, facing not just bankruptcy but possible legal consequences. "Does he know you're telling me this?" I asked, already guessing the answer. "No." Imara's voice was barely audible. "He'd be furious. But I don't know who else to turn to. He won't listen to me. He's convinced he can still make this work if he just keeps juggling a little longer." "Why come to me? After everything that's happened between us?" Imara met my eyes directly. "Because whatever he says, Darius still respects you. And because you're the only person I know who might be able to help without destroying him in the process." The waiter approached, and we both ordered mechanically, neither of us with any appetite. Once he'd gone, I leaned forward. "What exactly are you asking me to do, Imara?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I just know he needs help before this gets worse. Before he does something that can't be undone." I considered my options. In 2 days, I would own the mortgage on the Obsidian Tower property. That would give me leverage, but would it be enough to pull Darius back from the brink? And more importantly, would he accept help from me, even with his back against the wall? "Has he mentioned my attempts to acquire the construction debt?" I asked carefully. Imara nodded. "He was furious. Sees it as you trying to undermine him." "And what do you think?" She considered the question. "I think you're trying to protect him from himself, and the company from his mistakes." At least someone understood my intentions. "Imara, I need you to listen carefully. I can help, but Darius has to be willing to accept that help. No more evasions, no more financial shell games." "What kind of help can you offer?" Hope flickered across her features. "I'd rather discuss that directly with Darius, but it would mean significant changes to the Obsidian Tower project, changes he's been unwilling to consider so far." Imara nodded slowly. "The Harrington Building preservation." "Among other things, yes." She straightened her shoulders, decision made. "I'll get him to meet with you, whatever it takes." "Tomorrow evening," I specified. "At my house. No associates, no advisors. Just Darius and me." "He'll be there," she promised, "even if I have to drag him." After lunch, I called Keone from my car. "We need to close tomorrow," I said without preamble. "Can you make it happen?" "I've been pushing all morning," he replied. "Patricia has agreed to an expedited process. We can sign at 9 a.m. Relief flooded through me. "Thank you." "Thalia," he said, his voice turning serious. "Once you own this mortgage, you understand what it means? The position you're putting? Yourself and relative to your son." "I do," I assured him. "But the alternative is watching him destroy himself and Nautilus along with him. I can't do that, Keone. Not when I have the means to intervene." The signing ceremony at Eastern Continental Bank the next morning was surprisingly subdued. Patricia Montrose personally oversaw the transaction, her expression professionally neutral as I signed document after document, transferring nearly my entire net worth into the acquisition. "The mortgage is now officially yours," she said when the last paper was signed. "I hope you know what you're doing, Thalia." "So do I admitted. By that afternoon, word had begun circulating through Crescent Harbor's financial community that the Obsidian Tower's land mortgage had changed hands. The buyer's identity remained confidential, but speculation was rampant. I received 3 calls from financial reporters before deciding to silence my phone entirely. I spent the hours before Darius's arrival preparing, not just mentally, but physically transforming my modest living room into a space conducive to difficult conversations. I cleared the coffee table of magazines and knickknacks, replacing them with relevant documents neatly arranged. I set out water and coffee, but no alcohol. This needed to be a clear-headed discussion. At precisely 7 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath and opened the door to find Darius standing on my porch, jaw tight, posture rigid. Imara stood slightly behind him, her hand on his arm in what appeared to be both support and restraint. "Come in," I said simply, stepping aside. Darius entered without a word, his eyes immediately scanning the room, landing on the documents laid out on the coffee table. "What is this?" he demanded. "Some kind of intervention?" Imara squeezed his arm. "Darius, please, just listen." He shrugged off her hand. "Listen to what? Another lecture about how I'm ruining everything? About how Mother knows best?" His voice dripped with sarcasm. "No lecture," I said calmly. "Just facts. And a proposal." Darius scoffed but took a seat on my sofa. Imara settled beside him, tension visible in every line of her body. I remained standing, drawing strength from the position. "I know about the financial irregularities, Darius. The fund transfers, the misused escrow accounts." His face paled slightly, eyes darting to Imara. "You told her?" "She's trying to help you," Imara said firmly. "We both are." "I don't need—" "Yes, you do." I cut him off. "The Obsidian Tower is failing, Darius. Construction is behind schedule. Costs are spiraling. Investors are getting nervous. And now you're crossing legal lines to keep it afloat." "It's temporary," he insisted. "Once we get past these delays—" "There won't be a past these delays unless something fundamental changes," I interrupted. "The project as designed is too ambitious, too expensive, and faces too much community opposition. So your solution is what? Abandon it? Let Nautilus collapse?" His voice rose. "Is that what you want? To see me fail so you can say, 'I told you so'?" "Of course not," I said quietly. "What I want is to save what can be saved. The company. Your reputation. The Harrington building." "Always back to that damn building," he muttered. "Yes, because it matters. Not just to me, but to this city." I took a deep breath. "Darius, I've acquired the mortgage on the Obsidian Tower property." The silence that followed was absolute. Darius stared at me, shock replacing anger on his face. What?" he finally managed. "As of 9 o'clock this morning, I hold the mortgage on the land where you're planning to build. The land currently occupied by the Harrington building." Imara gasped softly. "That's what you meant by help." Darius stood abruptly, fists clenched. "This isn't help. This is a hostile takeover. My own mother, using my financial difficulties against me." "No," I said firmly. "This is a mother using every resource at her disposal to save her son from himself. To give you an exit strategy that doesn't end with Nautilus in ruins, and you potentially facing regulatory investigations." "An exit strategy?" He laughed bitterly. "You mean surrender, on your terms." "I mean compromise." I gestured to the documents on the table. "I've had architects working on alternative plans, ways to incorporate the Harrington building into a new development. Smaller scale, but still profitable, still prestigious." "You've been planning this all along," he accused, "waiting for me to be vulnerable enough that I'd have no choice but to accept your interference." "No," I corrected him. "I've been trying to find a solution that preserves what matters while still allowing for progress. The only difference is that now I have the leverage to make you consider it." Darius paced across my living room, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "And if I refuse? If I fight this? Then I'll do what any mortgage holder would do, protect my investment." I kept my voice level. "But I don't want that, Darius. I want us to find a way forward together." "Together?" he repeated mockingly. "After you went behind my back to undermine my flagship project? After I used my personal funds, including liquidating my Nautilus shares, to create an opportunity to save what can be saved," I corrected. Do you even understand what I've risked to do this? My retirement security, my financial independence, everything. Why? He demanded. Why go to these lengths? Because you're my son, I said simply. And because Nautilus is my legacy too. I couldn't stand by and watch both be destroyed. Something in my tone must have reached him. He stopped pacing, his expression shifting from anger to confusion. You really believe the project will fail, don't you? I know it will, I said gently. The numbers don't lie, Darius. Even without the preservation issues, the economics were always marginal. With the delays and cost overruns, it's now mathematically impossible for the Obsidian Tower as designed to succeed. Imara stood, moving to her husband's side. Darius, please. Look at the alternatives Thalia is offering. At least consider them. He stood frozen, caught between pride and pragmatism. I could almost see the calculations running behind his eyes, assessing options, weighing outcomes, searching for any path that didn't involve conceding to me. Whatever you're thinking, I said quietly. Whatever financial maneuver or legal challenge or end run you're contemplating, ask yourself one question. Is it worth risking everything? Not just your vision for the Obsidian Tower, but Nautilus itself? Your professional reputation? Your freedom? The fight seemed to drain out of him all at once. He sank back onto the sofa, suddenly looking exhausted. Show me the alternative plans, he said finally. Relief washed over me, but I kept my expression neutral as I spread the architectural renderings across the coffee table. This is the Heritage Spire concept. It preserves the Harrington Building's facade and most of its interior, incorporating it as the grand entrance to a more modest but still striking tower behind it. Darius studied the drawings with a professional eye. The square footage is significantly reduced. Yes, I acknowledged, but so are the construction costs, and the community opposition would evaporate overnight if you announced this pivot. In fact, you'd likely gain support from preservation groups and city leadership. Zephyr would never agree to this, he muttered. Zephyr Blackwood is a businessman first and foremost, I countered. Present him with numbers that work, and he'll adapt. Darius continued examining the plans, asking technical questions that I answered as best I could, deferring to the detailed documentation when necessary. After nearly an hour of review, he looked up at me, expression unreadable. And if I agree to this alternative, what happens to the mortgage you now hold? I'll convert it to a long-term fixed-rate instrument with favorable terms, I said. Better than what Eastern Continental was offering. And I'll assist with renegotiating the construction financing to align with the new project scope. Why would you do that? After everything I said to you? His voice had lost its edge, genuine confusion replacing anger. I met his eyes directly. Because some things are more important than being right, Darius. Some relationships are worth fighting for, even when they're broken. A heavy silence filled the room. Imara watched her husband intently, hope and anxiety battling in her expression. Finally, Darius spoke, his voice quiet but clear. I need time to review this properly, to run the numbers myself. A pause. But I'm willing to consider it. No promises beyond that. It wasn't full acceptance, but it was more than I'd dared hope for. That's all I ask, I said simply. As they prepared to leave, Darius lingered at the door while Imara walked ahead to their car. He turned to me, hesitation in his movements. Why didn't you just let me fail? He asked suddenly. After what I said to you, after I called your work worthless. He stumbled over the last word, perhaps hearing its cruelty for the first time. I looked at my son, my ambitious, brilliant, flawed son, and felt the weight of decades of love and worry and pride and disappointment. Because that's not what mothers do, I said softly. At least, not this mother. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite remorse, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. He nodded once, then turned and walked down the path to where Imara waited. I closed the door and leaned against it, exhaustion suddenly overwhelming me. The battle wasn't over. Darius hadn't fully committed to the alternative plan. And even if he did, executing the pivot would be complicated and fraught with challenges. But a door had opened. A possibility existed where before there had been only impending disaster. My phone buzzed with a text from Keone. "How did it go?" I typed back, "He's considering the alternatives. It's a start." 3 days later, I received a call from Patricia Montrose. "Have you seen the news?" she asked without preamble. "No," I admitted, having deliberately avoided financial media since acquiring the mortgage. "What's happened?" "Pinnacle Developments just announced a dramatic revision to the Obsidian Tower project," she said, an unmistakable note of admiration in her voice. "They're preserving the Harrington Building and incorporating it into what they're calling the Heritage Spire. The press release credits the change to listening to community feedback and honoring Crescent Harbor's architectural legacy." I closed my eyes, relief washing over me in waves. "How's the market reacting?" "Positively," Patricia said. "Nautilus stock is up 8% already. The preservation groups are celebrating. City officials are falling over themselves to praise the decision." "And Zephyr Blackwood? Standing right beside your son at the press conference looking like this was his idea all along." She chuckled. "Survival instinct of a cockroach, that one." "Thank you for letting me know," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the emotions threatening to overflow. "One more thing, Thalia," Patricia added. "Your son specifically mentioned the wisdom of experienced voices in the financial community guiding the decision. He didn't name you directly, but everyone who knows us will understand." I smiled despite myself. It wasn't quite an apology or acknowledgement, but from Darius, it was significant. "So, what happens now?" Patricia asked. "With the mortgage you acquired?" "Now we renegotiate terms to support the revised project," I said. "As promised." After ending the call, I sat at my desk, staring at the framed photo I kept there. Darius at his college graduation, arm around my shoulders, both of us beaming at the camera. For the first time in months, that image didn't bring a pang of loss. My phone buzzed again. Another text, this time from an unexpected source. Darius himself. "Dinner tonight? Just the two of us. We have things to discuss." I typed back immediately. "I'd like that. My place or yours?" His response came quickly. "Neither. Lantern Point Grill at 7. Our old spot. Our old spot." The restaurant near the park where I'd taken him for special occasions throughout his childhood. Where we'd celebrated his first successful deal at Nautilus. Where we'd last had a civil meal together before everything fell apart. "I'll be there," I replied. I set down my phone and turned to the window, gazing out at the Crescent Harbor skyline, where the Harrington Building would now continue to stand, a testament to preservation amid progress, to balance, to compromise, and perhaps to reconciliation as well. The journey wasn't over. There would be complicated negotiations ahead, difficult conversations, the inevitable tensions of rebuilding trust. But for the first time in too long, I felt hope. Not just for the city I loved or the company I'd built, but for the relationship with my son that I'd feared was irreparably broken. Sometimes, the most valuable things are worth risking everything to save, even when they call you worthless. Lantern Point Grill hadn't changed much over the years. The copper lantern still hung from rough-hewn beams, casting warm amber light over white tablecloths. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the harbor vista, city lights reflecting like scattered diamonds across the dark water. The maitre d' recognized me immediately, his smile genuine as he led me to a corner table overlooking the cliffs. "Mr. Merritt has already arrived," he informed me, gesturing to where Darius sat, back straight, fingers tapping nervously against his water glass. He stood when he saw me, a formality he'd abandoned years ago. It struck me as both touching and telling, a return to the manners I'd instilled in him as a boy. "Mother," he greeted me, pulling out my chair. "Thank you for coming." "Of course," I replied, settling into my seat and placing my napkin across my lap with practiced ease. "It's good to see you, Darius." An awkward silence descended as we studied our menus, both of us hiding behind the familiar ritual of choosing dishes we already knew by heart. The waiter's arrival provided momentary relief, our orders given with the precision of people who frequented fine restaurants. When we were alone again, Darius cleared his throat. "I suppose congratulations are in order," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "The market response to the Heritage Spire announcement has been significant." "It seems people appreciate the balance of preservation and progress," I observed. "I suspect the project will be more successful now than the original concept would have been." "Perhaps." He took a sip of water. "Though we'll never know for certain, will we?" I met his gaze directly. "Sometimes certainty isn't worth the price of discovery." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Still speaking in proverbs, I see." "Old habits," I acknowledged, returning his almost smile with one of my own. The arrival of our wine, a Crescent Harbor Vineyards Reserve Cabernet, another tradition, provided another brief reprieve from conversation. The sommelier poured with practiced flourish, and we went through the motions of tasting and approving. After he left, Darius raised his glass slightly. "To compromises," he offered. I lifted mine in response. "To finding better paths forward." We sipped in unison, the rich, familiar taste of local grapes grounding me in the moment. "I've been thinking about what happened," Darius said finally, setting down his glass. "About what I said to you that day in my office." I waited, giving him space to continue. "It was cruel," he admitted, not quite meeting my eyes. "And untrue. Your approach to business isn't worthless. It's just different from mine." Coming from Darius, this was tantamount to a full apology. I accepted it as such. "Thank you," I said simply. "We do have different perspectives. Both have value." "Evidently." He gestured vaguely toward the harbor, where the Meridian District's illuminated outline was visible. "The preservation groups are calling the Heritage Spire revision a visionary compromise. The mayor wants us to speak at next month's Economic Development Forum." "Quite a turnaround from where things stood a week ago," I observed. "Yes, well." He shifted uncomfortably. "Necessity is the mother of invention. Or in this case, reinvention." Our first course arrived, seared scallops with citrus reduction for me, tartare for him. We focused on our plates for a few moments, the familiar flavors offering comfort amid the tension. "I've been reviewing the financial restructuring you proposed," Darius said after a while, "for the mortgage and construction loans." "And?" I prompted when he didn't continue. "And it's solid, creative, the kind of approach I might have dismissed as too conservative a month ago, but now." He shook his head slightly. "Now I see the wisdom in it. Secure foundation, reasonable growth, manageable risk," I summarized. "Not as flashy as what you'd planned, but sustainable." "Sustainable," he repeated thoughtfully. That word has taken on new meaning for me lately. I tilted my head questioningly. "When you're riding high, sustainability seems like settling," he explained. "When you're staring into the abyss, it suddenly looks like salvation." I couldn't help but smile. A lesson usually learned the hard way. "Speaking of hard ways," Darius said, his expression turning serious again, "I know what it cost you to purchase that mortgage. Financially, I mean." Keone mentioned you liquidated almost everything. I nodded, not particularly surprised that Keone had spoken with him. It was worth the risk. To save me from myself? A hint of the old defensiveness crept into his voice. To save what matters, I corrected gently. Nautilus, the Harrington building, your reputation, our relationship. He was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. When did you decide to do it? Buy the mortgage, I mean. After our confrontation in your office, I admitted. When you made it clear you wouldn't consider any alternatives until it was too late. And you didn't think to just talk to me again? Try to convince me? I gave him a pointed look. Would you have listened? He had the grace to look abashed. No, probably not. A pause. I was so certain I knew better, that my approach was superior to everything that came before. The hubris of youth, I said, though without rancor. Or perhaps just the hubris of success. Early victories can make us overconfident. Something you learned long ago, I imagine, he observed. Oh yes, I confirmed. I made my share of mistakes building Nautilus. The difference was, I had mentors who pulled me back from the edge before disaster struck. Like you did for me, he acknowledged quietly. I inclined my head slightly, accepting the comparison. Our main courses arrived. Salmon for me, venison for him. Another constant in our ever-shifting relationship. The familiar choreography of fine dining provided structure to a conversation that might otherwise have wandered into uncomfortable territory too quickly. I've been thinking about Nautilus, Darius said, after we'd eaten in companionable silence for a few minutes, about its direction going forward. I maintained a neutral expression, though my interest was immediately piqued. Oh? The heritage. Spire Pivot has given us an opportunity to recalibrate our overall approach, not just for this project, but for the company's strategy. In what way? I asked, careful not to seem too eager. He set down his fork, organizing his thoughts. When I took over, I pushed hard toward large-scale development financing. It seemed like the obvious growth path. Bigger projects, bigger returns. A logical conclusion, I allowed. But after what happened, the community pushback, the regulatory scrutiny, the financial strain, I'm reconsidering. He met my gaze directly. There might be value in a more balanced approach, preserving some of Nautilus's traditional focus on restoration and community development while still pursuing selective growth opportunities. It was everything I might have hoped to hear, yet I kept my response measured. That sounds sensible. Both paths have their strengths. Which brings me to something I wanted to discuss with you. Darius straightened in his chair, his expression turning formal. I'd like you to consider returning to Nautilus, in an advisory capacity. The invitation caught me off guard, despite the evening's conciliatory tone. You want me back at the company? As a senior advisor, he clarified quickly, not in operations. You would consult on strategic direction, particularly for our community development and restoration portfolio. Your expertise in those areas is unmatched. I took a moment to consider his offer, sipping my wine to give myself time. What? About Heritage Capital? You could maintain your role there, he said. This would be a separate arrangement, a few hours each week perhaps. And the board? Would they support this? They already have, he admitted. I discussed it with them yesterday after the Heritage Spire announcement. They were unanimous in their support. I raised an eyebrow. The same board that voted to marginalize me last year? Darius had the good grace to look uncomfortable. Financial realities have a way of clarifying priorities. Your approach to the Obsidian Tower situation, acquiring the mortgage but using that leverage constructively rather than punitively, impressed them. They see the value in your perspective now. And you? I asked, the question at the heart of everything. What do you see? He met my gaze directly. I see that I was wrong to dismiss your experience, that there's wisdom in your caution, that Nautilus needs both innovation and tradition to thrive. It was as close to a complete reversal as I was likely to get from my proud son. I found myself unexpectedly moved by the gesture, though I kept my expression composed. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully, but I'd need to think about it. Returning to Nautilus, even in an advisory role, would be complicated. Of course, he nodded. Take whatever time you need. The remainder of our dinner passed in easier conversation. We discussed the practical aspects of the Heritage Spire redesign, the market's reaction, the scheduling challenges, professional topics where we could find common ground without venturing too deeply into the emotional terrain we'd begun to navigate. As we waited for dessert, creme brulee for both of us, another shared preference, Darius brought up a subject I hadn't expected. Imara and I are expecting, he said quietly, a daughter, due in January. Joy surged through me, momentarily displacing all other concerns. Oh, Darius, that's wonderful news. He smiled, genuine warmth replacing his earlier guardedness. We found out just before. Everything happened with the Obsidian Tower. We were waiting for the right moment to tell you. I'm so happy for you both, I said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand briefly. A granddaughter, my first grandchild. Yes, he confirmed. And we've been discussing names, Imara suggested. Well, we thought perhaps Thalia, after you. The unexpected gesture brought tears to my eyes before I could compose myself. I would be honored, I managed, my voice thick with emotion. It seems fitting, Darius said, looking slightly embarrassed by my reaction. A way to honor the past while embracing the future, a connection across generations. Thank you, I said simply, unable to articulate the complex swirl of feelings his announcement had triggered. We lingered over dessert and coffee, our conversation, turning to lighter topics, nursery designs, Imara's cravings, the way parenthood changes one's perspective. For these precious moments, we were just mother and son again, sharing family news without the weight of business conflicts hanging between us. As the evening drew to a close, Darius insisted on handling the check, another small gesture of respect that didn't go unnoticed. Outside, the cool harbor breeze carried the scent of salt and distant pine as we walked to our cars. I've been thinking about something else, Darius said, pausing beside my vehicle. About the mortgage you now hold on the Obsidian Tower property. What about it? I asked, curious where this was heading. I'd like to buy it back, he said, directly. Not immediately, but over time. A structured repurchase that would eventually return your investment to you. I studied him in the soft glow of the parking lot lights. Why is that important to you? Because it represents something I need to address, he said carefully. A debt, financial and otherwise, that I owe you. I want to make it right. I considered his proposal. The mortgage represented security for me, leverage to ensure the Heritage Spire project stayed true to its revised vision. Yet it also created an ongoing financial entanglement that might complicate our healing relationship. We can discuss terms, I agreed finally. But there's no rush, Darius. I'm comfortable with the current arrangement. Thank you. He hesitated, then added, for everything. Not just the mortgage situation, but for not giving up on me, even when I gave you every reason to. The vulnerability in his voice touched me deeply. Without overthinking, I stepped forward and embraced him, our first genuine hug in longer than I cared to remember. After a moment's stiffness, his arms came around me, returning the gesture. That's what family does, I said softly as we separated. We don't give up on each other, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult. Driving home that night, I felt lighter than I had in months. The rift between Darius and me wasn't fully healed. Too much had happened for instant reconciliation. But we had taken significant steps toward understanding, toward forgiveness, toward a new relationship built on mutual respect rather than the simpler dynamics of parent and child. The following morning, I arrived at Heritage Capital to find Keone waiting in my office, his expression expectant. "Well?" he prompted as I hung my coat. "How was dinner?" I smiled, settling into my chair. "Productive. Healing even." "Details." "Thalia," he insisted. "I didn't spend 40 years practicing law to be satisfied with vague adjectives." I laughed, then filled him in on the dinner conversation. Darius's acknowledgement of his mistakes, his invitation for me to rejoin Nautilus as an advisor, his desire to eventually repurchase the mortgage, and most movingly, the news about the baby. "Little Thalia," Keone mused when I finished. "That's quite a peace offering." "It is," I agreed, though I believe it was Imara's suggestion originally. "Smart woman?" He nodded. "She always struck me as the steadiest influence in that household." He leaned forward, expression turning more serious. "So what will you do? About the advisory position?" I looked out my office window at the Meridian District, the neighborhood I'd helped revitalize through decades of careful financing decisions. At Nautilus, in the distance, construction equipment surrounded the Harrington building, now draped with banners announcing the Heritage Spire project. "I think I'll accept," I said finally. "With clear parameters. A few hours each week, focused, specifically on restoration and community development projects. No direct involvement in operational decisions. A way to influence without controlling," Keone observed. "Wisdom rather than authority." "Exactly," I confirmed. "Darius needs to lead Nautilus his way, but with better balance than before. If I can help provide that balance without undermining his leadership, it could be beneficial for everyone." "And Heritage Capital? You'll continue here as well?" "Absolutely. This is my primary focus now. The work we're doing in underserved neighborhoods, the difference we're making, it matters too much to step back." Keone nodded, satisfied. "I think you're making the right choice, on all fronts." Our conversation was interrupted by my assistant, Larissa, knocking briefly before entering with a large bouquet of orchids, my favorite flower. "These just arrived for you," she announced, placing them on my desk. I opened the accompanying card. "To new beginnings and balanced perspectives. Thank you for saving what matters." D. Keone raised an eyebrow at my smile. "From Darius?" I nodded, touching one delicate bloom gently. "It seems reconciliation brings out his better instincts. Or perhaps just reminds him of the values you instilled long ago," Keone suggested. The next few weeks unfolded with cautious optimism. I began my advisory role at Nautilus, spending Thursday afternoons in a comfortable office near Darius's, not my old executive suite, but a respectful space that acknowledged my new position. The staff welcomed me warmly, particularly the veterans who remembered my leadership style. My first official act was reviewing the community impact assessment for the Heritage Spire project. Darius had commissioned a comprehensive study examining how the revised design would affect the surrounding neighborhood, economically, culturally, and aesthetically. "What do you think?" he asked when I'd finished reading the report. We were in his office, the late afternoon sun slanting through the windows, illuminating architectural models of the new design. "It's thorough," I acknowledged, "but it misses an opportunity." He tilted his head questioningly. "What opportunity?" "To actively enhance the neighborhood, not just minimize negative impacts." I flipped to a specific section of the report. "You're preserving the Harrington building's facade and much of its interior, which is excellent. But what if you took it further? What if you dedicated a portion of the ground floor to a community cultural space? A gallery showcasing Crescent, Harbor's architectural history perhaps, or a small museum about the Meridian District's evolution. Darius considered this, studying the model before us. That would reduce our leasable commercial space. Yes, I agreed. But it would create tremendous goodwill. It would transform the project from a compromise forced by circumstances into a genuine gift to the community. The marketing value alone would offset much of the lost revenue. A slow smile spread across his face, the expression I'd seen countless times when he grasped a new concept, going back to his childhood. You're turning a necessary concession into a strategic advantage, he observed. Exactly, I confirmed. It's not about minimizing losses. It's about creating different kinds of value. He made notes on a legal pad, already expanding on the concept. We could partner with the Historical Society. Maybe establish a small foundation to manage the space. Tax advantages there, plus more positive press. Now you're thinking like a true developer, I said with approval. One who sees beyond square footage calculations to the full spectrum of value creation. Darius looked up, something like pride, in his eyes. I learned from the best, even when I was too stubborn to admit it. Our working relationship developed its own rhythm over the following months. Once a week, we'd review projects, discuss strategy, and sometimes debate approaches, but the acrimony that had characterized our previous disagreements was gone, replaced by mutual respect and a willingness to learn from each other. The Heritage Spire project progressed steadily, transforming from a source of controversy into a point of civic pride. The preservation of the Harrington Building, coupled with the elegant modern tower rising behind it, became a symbol of Crescent Harbor's balanced approach to development, honoring history while embracing the future. My work at Heritage Capital continued in parallel, growing more impactful as our reputation for innovative community financing spread. We expanded into neighboring cities, helping revitalize historic districts and creating affordable housing. Models that preserved neighborhood character while providing much-needed units. One Tuesday afternoon, Darius surprised me by appearing at Heritage Capital's offices unannounced. Larissa showed him into my office with a curious expression. His visits here were rare, our professional interactions usually occurring at Nautilus. Is everything all right? I asked, immediately concerned. Everything's fine, he assured me, taking a seat across from my desk. Better than fine, actually. That's why I'm here. I waited expectantly. The Heritage Spire project just received final approval from the City Planning Commission, he announced, satisfaction evident in his voice. Unanimous vote. Construction on the tower portion begins next month. That's wonderful news, I said warmly. Congratulations, Darius. You've navigated a challenging situation skillfully. We've navigated it, he corrected. Your guidance was instrumental. He hesitated, then continued. Which brings me to the real reason for my visit. I have a proposal for you. I'm listening, I said, curious about this unexpected development. Nautilus and Heritage Capital have been operating as separate entities, sometimes collaborating but fundamentally distinct, he began. I've been thinking that there might be value in a more formal partnership. What kind of partnership? I asked cautiously. A joint venture focusing specifically on balanced development projects, he explained, leaning forward with the enthusiasm he always showed for new ideas. Projects that combine restoration with new construction, that honor heritage while creating modern spaces, that strengthen communities while generating reasonable returns. The Heritage Spire model, I observed. Exactly. He nodded. We've seen the market response to that approach. It's stronger than either of us anticipated. There's genuine demand for development that respects context and community. Nautilus brings scale and access to capital. Heritage brings expertise in restoration and community engagement. Together, we could create something unique in the industry. I considered his proposal, intrigued despite my initial reservations. It's an interesting concept, But wouldn't it dilute Nautilus's focus on larger commercial developments? Not dilute, diversify, he countered. The lessons from the Obsidian Tower situation weren't just about that specific project. They were about the vulnerabilities in our overall strategy. Too concentrated, too dependent on a few massive developments. This partnership would create a more balanced portfolio. Lower risk, more consistent returns, stronger community relationships. His argument was sound, reflecting the evolution in his thinking since our reconciliation began. Still, questions remained. And governance? I asked. How would decision-making work in this joint venture? Equal leadership, he said without hesitation. You and I as co-directors, each bringing our strengths to the table. I've drafted a preliminary structure. He placed a folder on my desk. Review it at your leisure. We can discuss modifications. I tapped the folder thoughtfully. This is a significant shift from where we stood a few months ago. Yes, he acknowledged. Life has a way of clarifying priorities. Such as? I prompted. His expression softened. Imara is halfway through her pregnancy now. Thinking about my daughter's future, about the kind of world she'll inherit, the kind of city she'll grow up in, it changes your perspective. I want her to live in a Crescent Harbor that honors its past while embracing its future. A city with character, not just endless glass towers. That sounds suspiciously like something I might have said, I observed with a smile. Perhaps your perspective wasn't as outdated as I claimed, he admitted ruefully. I picked up the folder. I'll review your proposal carefully. It has merit, certainly. Take your time, he said, rising to leave. This isn't a decision to rush. He paused at the door. Oh, and if you're free Sunday, Imara and I would love to have you over for dinner. We've finished the nursery and would appreciate your opinion. I'd like that very much, I said warmly. After he left, I sat quietly, reflecting on the journey that had brought us to this point. From bitter estrangement to potential business partners in just a few months. From his dismissal of my life's work as worthless to a proposal that centered the very values he had once rejected. The reconciliation wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, old patterns that occasionally resurfaced. But we were finding a new way forward, one that honored both our perspectives, that blended innovation with tradition, that recognized the value in different approaches to business and life. That Sunday, as I stood in the carefully decorated nursery, walls painted in soothing sage green, a bookshelf already filled with childhood classics, a rocking chair positioned perfectly by the window overlooking the harbor, I felt a profound sense of continuity. Of legacy in its truest form. Imara joined me, her hand resting gently on her growing belly. She's active today, she said with a smile, already making her presence known. Like her father, I observed, returning her smile. And her grandmother, for that matter. Darius told me about the joint venture proposal, Imara said, her tone carefully neutral. What do you think? I think it has potential, I replied honestly. A way to combine our respective strengths while bridging our different perspectives. She nodded thoughtfully. It's been remarkable, watching him recalibrate these past few months. He still has his ambition, his drive, but it's tempered now, more grounded. Parenthood has a way of shifting priorities, I noted. It's more than that, Imara countered gently. It's you. The way you handled the Obsidian Tower situation, it made an impression. You could have destroyed him, but instead you created a path forward that preserved what mattered. That taught him something valuable. I was touched by her assessment, though I deflected slightly. He would have found his way eventually. Darius has always been bright. Bright, yes, but wisdom is different from intelligence, she observed. That's what he's gaining now, thanks in no small part to you. From downstairs, Darius called that dinner was ready. As Imara and I descended to join him, I caught sight of our reflections in the hallway mirror. 3 generations of the Merritt family, present and future, connected by blood and shared vision, by conflict and reconciliation, by the complex, enduring bonds that define us. My son, who had once called my life's work worthless, was now embracing its central tenets. Not because I had forced him to, but because life had taught him lessons I couldn't impart through words alone. Because experience had revealed the wisdom and balance that my lectures never could. And perhaps that was the greatest victory of all. Not winning an argument, but watching understanding dawn naturally. Not compelling compliance, but witnessing genuine growth. As we gathered around Darius's dining table, the conversation flowing, easily between business and family matters, I felt a profound gratitude for the journey we'd traveled. For the crisis that had nearly broken us but ultimately strengthened our bonds. For the mortgage I'd purchased not just as a financial instrument, but as a bridge back to connection. To family, Darius proposed, raising his glass of sparkling cider in deference to Imara's pregnancy. And to partnerships that honor the past while building the future. To family, Imara and I echoed, our glasses meeting with the clear, bright sound of possibilities yet to unfold. 6 months after that Sunday dinner, the Heritage Spire was taking shape against Crescent Harbor's skyline. The carefully preserved Harrington building stood proudly at its base, its Art Deco details meticulously restored, while the sleek, modern tower rose behind it like a crystal growing from ancient stone. The contrast was striking yet harmonious, exactly the balance we'd sought to achieve. I stood at the construction site beside Darius, both of us in hard hats and safety vests, watching workers install massive glass panels on the tower's 20th floor. The winter sun glinted off the surface, sending prisms of light dancing across the Harrington's limestone facade. It's more beautiful than I imagined, I admitted, shielding my eyes from the glare. The renderings didn't capture how the buildings would complement each other. Darius nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. The architects say we've created a new aesthetic category. Heritage modernism, they're calling it. Sounds like something that will appear in architectural journals, I observed with a smile. Already has. He handed me a glossy magazine pulled from his briefcase. Crescent Harbor Feature, page 38. I flipped to the article, titled The Renaissance of Reverence, How Heritage Spire Redefines Urban Development. The 8-page spread featured striking photographs of the construction process, architectural drawings, and, most surprisingly, a prominent photo of Darius and me, heads bent together over blueprints, identified as the visionary mother-son team behind Merritt Ventures. Merritt Ventures? I questioned, tapping the caption. The official name of our joint venture, he explained. The paperwork was finalized yesterday. I was going to surprise you at the office, but... He gestured at the magazine with a hint of boyish pride. I scanned the article, which praised the project's ingenious balance of preservation and innovation, and highlighted the community cultural space we'd incorporated into the ground floor. The writer described our approach as a template for 21st century urban development, one that honors history while embracing progress. They've captured the essence of what we're trying to achieve, I noted, genuinely impressed. It's generating interest beyond Crescent Harbor, Darius added. I've received inquiries from developers in 3 other cities, asking about our methodology and approach. Methodology, I repeated with amusement. You make it sound so scientific. Isn't it, in a way, he countered. Finding the optimal balance between preservation and progress, between community needs and financial viability. There's a formula there. Not mathematical, perhaps, but systematic. I suppose you're right, I conceded, though I've always considered it more art than science. The best approaches are both, he said, leading me toward the Harrington Building's entrance, where interior restoration was nearly complete. Speaking of which, I want to show you something. Inside, the building's grand lobby was a masterpiece of Art Deco craftsmanship. Terrazzo floors, bronze fixtures, murals depicting Crescent Harbor's maritime history. Construction dust still lingered in the air, but the space had been transformed from the neglected, water-damaged shell I'd last seen into something approaching its original glory. Remarkable, I breathed, turning slowly to take in the intricate ceiling details. The preservation team has outdone themselves. That's not what I wanted to show you, Darius said, guiding me toward a door marked Heritage Gallery, coming soon. He produced a key and unlocked it, stepping back to let me enter first. The large room beyond was still under construction, but its purpose was clear from the partially installed display cases and information panels. One wall featured a timeline of Crescent Harbor's architectural evolution, from its early maritime buildings through the Art Deco period and into the modern era. Another showcased photographs of restoration projects, many of which, I realized, with a start, had been financed by Nautilus during my tenure. This is the community cultural space we discussed, Darius explained, watching my reaction closely. But I've expanded the concept. It's not just about the Harrington Building or even Meridian District. It's about Crescent Harbor's broader architectural heritage, about the work that people like you have done to preserve it. I moved deeper into the room, noting the care that had gone into planning each exhibit. Near the center stood a covered pedestal, conspicuous in its prominence. "What's under there?" I asked, gesturing toward it. Darius hesitated, suddenly looking uncertain. It's the centerpiece of the gallery, but it's not finished yet. I wasn't planning to show you until the opening. Now you've made me curious, I said, moving toward it. He stepped forward quickly. All right, but it's a surprise, and it's still just a prototype. With visible nervousness, he lifted the cloth covering. Beneath was a bronze plaque mounted on marble, inscribed with flowing script. At the top were the words, "The Thalia Merit Legacy Fund for Architectural Preservation and Community Development." I stared at it, momentarily speechless. "It's a foundation," Darius explained into the silence, "endowed with 5% of all Merit Ventures profits in perpetuity. It will provide grants for restoration projects, community space preservation, affordable housing within historic districts, all the causes you've championed throughout your career." The thoughtfulness of the gesture struck me deeply. This wasn't just acknowledgement of my work. It was institutionalization of my values. A commitment that they would continue to shape Crescent Harbor long after I was gone. Did you plan this?" I asked finally, my voice not entirely steady. "I've been working on it since we formed the joint venture," he admitted. "The lawyers finalized the structure last week. The fund will be administered by a board, you as chairperson, for as long as you wish, then Imara, and eventually Little. Thalia, if she's interested." I touched the plaque gently, tracing the letters of my name. "Darius, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," he replied softly. "It's a small repayment for what I almost destroyed. Your legacy, your vision for this city." He paused. "For what I dismissed as worthless." The word hung between us, its sting long faded, but its memory still potent. "You've more than made amends," I assured him. "This joint venture, the Heritage Spire, our reconciliation, that's what matters to me, far more than any plaque or foundation." "Nevertheless," he said firmly, "your approach deserves to be honored, to be continued. This ensures it will be." I embraced him then, professional setting forgotten in a moment of profound gratitude. He returned the hug without hesitation, the awkwardness that had once characterized our physical interactions completely gone. "Thank you," I said simply as we separated. He nodded, eyes suspiciously bright. "Let me show you the rest of the gallery plans." For the next hour, We toured the space, discussing exhibit designs and educational programs. The gallery would open to the public the same day as the Heritage Spire's official completion, a date now just 3 months away. Darius had arranged partnerships with local schools, ensuring that Crescent Harbor's children would learn about the importance of architectural preservation and community-conscious development. "You've thought of everything," I observed as we finally left the building, blinking in the bright afternoon light. "I had a good teacher," he replied. "Better than I deserved given my behavior." "Water under the bridge," I assured him. "What matters is where we go from here." As if on cue, my phone chimed with a text from Imara. "Baby Thalia is getting impatient for lunch with her grandmother. Are you two still at the construction site?" I showed Darius the message with a smile. "It seems we're keeping the ladies waiting." "Never a good idea," he agreed, checking his watch. "We should head over. Imara's pregnancy cravings wait for no one, especially not in the 3rd trimester." We'd made a tradition of Sunday lunches together, watching as Imara's pregnancy progressed and discussing both family and business matters in the relaxed setting of their home. At 7 months along, Imara had developed a particular fondness for spicy Thalassan cuisine, which Darius dutifully procured each week despite his own milder palate. "How's the nursery coming along?" I asked as we walked toward our cars. The original sage green design had gradually evolved to include more whimsical elements as Imara's nesting instinct intensified. "The mural artist finished yesterday," Darius replied. "A harbor scene with fantastical elements, mermaids, friendly sea monsters, ships with rainbow sails. Imara wanted something that would inspire imagination." "It sounds wonderful," I said, thinking how different this was from Darius's own nursery, which I'd decorated in practical, gender-neutral tones during my financially strapped early days at Nautilus. How far we'd all come. At their Halcyon Bay. "Home!" Imara greeted us in the foyer, her pregnant belly prominent beneath a flowing silk tunic. Despite being in her 3rd trimester, she maintained her characteristic elegance, hair swept up in a casual knot, minimal makeup enhancing her natural beauty. "Finally," she teased, kissing Darius's cheek before embracing me. "We were beginning to think you'd abandoned us for construction dust and blueprints." "Never," I assured her, placing a hand gently on her stomach. "How's my granddaughter today?" "Active," Imara laughed. "I think she's practicing kickboxing in there. Or possibly training for the Crescent Harbor Marathon." "Athletic like her father," I observed as we moved toward the dining room, where enticing aromas wafted from takeout containers. "Speaking of athletics," Darius interjected, "Dr. Nishimura mentioned at our last appointment that prenatal swimming is excellent exercise for the 3rd trimester." Imara rolled her eyes good-naturedly. "Yes, dear, we've discussed this. I'm not opposed to swimming. I'm opposed to the communal pool at the fitness center, with its questionable hygiene and constant crowds." "The doctor also recommended staying active," Darius persisted, pulling out Imara's chair with practiced courtesy. "Maybe walks along the harbor. The fresh air would be good for both of you." I watched their gentle bickering with amusement, recognizing the pattern of a discussion they'd clearly had several times before. Darius's protective instincts had intensified as Imara's pregnancy progressed, sometimes veering into what she termed adorable but unnecessary hovering. "Actually," I interjected as we began serving the fragrant Thalassan dishes, "I might have a solution to the swimming dilemma." Both looked at me expectantly. "The Lantana building restoration in the Seaview district. It's one of Heritage Capital's projects," I explained. "The building includes a beautiful Art Nouveau indoor pool that's been meticulously restored. It was originally a private athletic club in the 1920s. We've arranged for it to operate as a membership facility again, with limited numbers to ensure privacy and comfort." "That sounds perfect," Imara said enthusiastically. "When does it open?" "Next week. And as one of the primary financiers, I happen to have access to founding memberships. I smiled. I was planning to offer you one as a baby gift, a family membership, so you'll have a beautiful, historically significant, and very clean place to swim throughout your pregnancy and beyond. Little Thalia can take her first swimming lessons there someday. That's incredibly thoughtful, Imara said warmly. Isn't it, Darius? He nodded, looking genuinely pleased. It solves the problem elegantly. Thank you, Mother. Consider it a practical contribution to my granddaughter's prenatal development, I said lightly. And speaking of development, show me this nursery mural I've been hearing about. After lunch, we migrated upstairs to the nursery, where the newly completed artwork transformed an entire wall into a dreamlike seascape. The artist had skillfully blended recognizable elements of Crescent Harbor, the distinctive lighthouse, the arched bridge, the hillside neighborhoods, with fantastical creatures and magical touches. Sunlight streamed through gauzy curtains, making the metallic accents in the paint shimmer like real water. It's enchanting, I breathed, taking in the details. Little Thalia will have wonderful dreams surrounded by this. That's the hope, Imara agreed, settling into the rocking chair by the window, the same chair that had been in Darius's nursery decades ago, now refinished and reupholstered, but still carrying the memory of countless lullabies and bedtime stories. As Imara and I discussed final touches for the nursery, Darius excused himself to take a business call. When he returned 20 minutes later, his expression was troubled. What is it? Imara asked immediately, attuned to her husband's moods. He hesitated, glancing between us. That was Zephyr Blackwood. My attention sharpened at the name. Though Zephyr had maintained his public association with the Heritage Spire project, he had gradually distanced himself from day-to-day involvement, focusing on developments in other cities. His sudden call suggested significance. What did he want? I asked carefully. Darius ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized from his childhood, always a sign of inner conflict. He's heard about Merit Ventures, about our joint venture specializing in balanced development. That's hardly confidential information, I observed, especially with the magazine feature. No, but he's apparently been watching our progress, with the Heritage Spire very closely. He claims we've pioneered a new market segment. Darius's tone suggested skepticism about Zephyr's choice of words. He wants to meet, to discuss a potential partnership. Imara's eyebrows rose. Partnership? With Blackwood Development? That's what he said, Darius confirmed. He mentioned access to projects in multiple cities, shared resources, expanded capital pools. I considered this unexpected development. Zephyr Blackwood was nothing if not opportunistic. If he saw profit potential in our approach, he would naturally want to position himself to benefit from it. But partnership implied a level of trust and aligned values that seemed fundamentally at odds with the man I'd encountered during the Obsidian Tower crisis. What do you think? I asked. Darius, curious about his perspective. He shook his head slightly. I told him I'd need to discuss it with you before considering any meeting. That Merit Ventures operates on consensus, not unilateral decisions. This simple acknowledgement, that major decisions required mutual agreement, was perhaps the clearest indication of how our professional relationship had evolved. The Darius of a year ago would have scheduled the meeting without hesitation, seeing Zephyr's interest as validation of his business acumen. Wise response, Imara commented, adjusting her position in the rocking chair. Zephyr Blackwood has a reputation for absorbing smaller partners and then discarding them once he's extracted what he needs. I'm aware, Darius agreed, but his reach is undeniable. Blackwood Development operates in 15 cities across 3 countries. If we're serious about extending the Heritage Spire model beyond Crescent Harbor, association with his firm could accelerate that expansion significantly. At what cost? I asked quietly. Darius met my gaze directly. That's the question, isn't it? What compromises would such a partnership require? What control would we have to cede? What values might be diluted in the process? His articulation of these concerns that aligned precisely with my own instinctive reservations, filled me with quiet pride. This was the thoughtful, strategic thinker I'd always known my son could be, when not blinded by ambition or ego. "I think we should hear him out," I said after a moment's consideration. "Not commit to anything, but listen to what he's proposing. Knowledge is never a disadvantage in business." Darius looked surprised. "You're open to working with Zephyr? After everything that happened with the Obsidian Tower?" "Open to listening," I clarified. "Business relationships don't require friendship or even particular trust if the structures and protections are properly designed. And sometimes keeping potential competitors close provides valuable intelligence." A slow smile spread across Darius's face. "That's unexpectedly pragmatic." "I didn't build Nautilus by being naive about human nature," I reminded him. "Even before you joined the company, I navigated plenty of complex relationships with difficult personalities. The key is entering such situations with clear eyes and well-defined boundaries." "The voice of experience," Imara observed approvingly. "This is precisely why Merit Ventures benefits from having both of you at the helm. Different perspectives, different generational insights, different risk assessments. We agreed to schedule a preliminary meeting with Zephyr for the following week with strict parameters. Informational only, no commitments, both Darius and I present for the entire discussion." As we settled back into more personal conversations for the remainder of the afternoon, I found myself reflecting on the symmetry of the situation. A year ago, Zephyr had approached me secretly, trying to leverage my influence to salvage the Obsidian Tower project. Now he was approaching us openly, seeking to benefit from the successful pivot we'd engineered. The power dynamics had shifted completely, from desperation to admiration, from manipulation to potential collaboration. The transformation extended beyond our relationship with Zephyr. The Heritage Spire, once a source of bitter conflict between Darius and me, had become the foundation of a new, stronger connection, professional and personal. What I had purchased as a desperate measure to save my son from financial ruin had evolved into the cornerstone of a thriving joint venture. My worthless perspective on balanced development had proven not only valuable but marketable, attracting attention from developers across the country. These reflections continued to occupy my thoughts the following morning as I arrived at Heritage Capital's offices. Larissa met me at the door, her expression unusually serious. "Ms. Merritt, there's someone waiting to see you," she said quietly. "He doesn't have an appointment, but he was quite insistent." "Who is it?" I asked, slipping off my coat. "Ajax Blackwood," she replied. "Zephyr Blackwood's son." This was unexpected. I knew of Ajax by reputation, a 30-something rising star in his father's company, known for aggressive tactics and unwavering ambition. His presence here, the day after Zephyr's call to Darius, seemed unlikely to be coincidental. "How long has he been waiting?" I inquired, buying time to consider my approach. "About 20 minutes. I put him in the small conference room with coffee." Larissa hesitated. "Should I call Mr. Merritt?" "Not yet," I decided. "Let me speak with Ajax first. I'm curious what brings him here rather than to Darius's office." The young man who rose to greet me as I entered the conference room bore a striking resemblance to his father. The same tall, lean build, the same carefully styled dark hair, the same calculating gaze. But where Zephyr cultivated a polished, almost patrician demeanor, Ajax projected a more contemporary image. Designer suit paired with subtle tattoos visible at his wrists, traditional leather shoes alongside a cutting-edge digital watch. "Ms. Merritt." He extended his hand. "Thank you for seeing me without an appointment. I apologize for the imposition. His grip was firm, his smile practiced. I gestured for him to retake his seat while I settled across from him. What brings you to Heritage Capital, Mr. Blackwood? I asked directly. I understand your father contacted my son yesterday about Merit Ventures. If Ajax was surprised by my awareness of this, he didn't show it. Yes, that's related to my visit. My father tends to take a traditional approach to business. Discussions. I thought a more direct conversation might be productive. Direct in what way? I inquired, maintaining a neutral expression. He leaned forward slightly. Ms. Merritt, let's acknowledge the realities. You and my father have history, specifically around the Obsidian Tower project. That history likely colors your perception of any proposal coming from Blackwood Development. A reasonable assumption, I allowed. I'm here to suggest an alternative, Ajax continued smoothly. A partnership between Heritage Capital and Blackwood Next Gen, the division I head within my father's company. A separate arrangement from whatever discussions may occur with Merit Ventures. This was an interesting approach, attempting to create multiple points of connection between our organizations, potentially playing Darius and me against each other. If I hadn't been forewarned by our recent experiences, I might have missed the subtlety of the strategy. What would this partnership entail? I asked, curious how he would frame the proposal. Blackwood Next Gen focuses on innovative development models, he explained. Sustainability, adaptive reuse, community integration, areas where Heritage Capital has demonstrated particular expertise. We have projects in development across multiple markets, but lack your specialized knowledge of financing structures for restoration and community-centered design. And what would Heritage Capital gain from this arrangement? I prompted. Scale, he replied immediately. Access to markets beyond Crescent Harbor, capital resources that would allow you to take on significantly larger projects. And, Carr added with a hint of confidence that reminded me forcefully of a younger Darius. Association with the development firm of the future. I studied him thoughtfully. Ajax Blackwood was clearly intelligent and ambitious. His approach, coming directly to me, separate from his father's overture to Darius, suggested both initiative and a certain political savvy. But the underlying strategy remained concerning, creating separate relationships that could potentially be leveraged against each other. An interesting proposal, I said finally. But Heritage Capital doesn't operate independently of Merit Ventures in areas where our focuses overlap. Any partnership discussions would need to include my son. A flicker of something, disappointment, annoyance, crossed Ajax's features before his professional mask returned. Of course, I simply thought a preliminary conversation might be valuable, to establish whether there's enough common ground to warrant broader discussions. There's always value in conversation, I agreed. But transparency is one of Heritage Capital's core principles. I don't engage in discussions that might affect Merit Ventures without Darius's knowledge. Ajax nodded, recalibrating his approach. I respect that position. Perhaps we could arrange a joint meeting. My father with Mr. Merritt, myself with you, all at the same table? This suggestion was more reasonable, though I remained wary of the Blackwoods' motives. That might be arranged. I'll need to discuss it with my son first. Of course. Ajax stood, recognizing the conversation had reached its natural conclusion. Thank you for your time, Ms. Merritt. Whatever form these discussions ultimately take, I believe there's significant potential for mutually beneficial collaboration. After showing him out, I immediately called Darius, filling him in on Ajax's unexpected visit and proposal. Interesting timing, he observed. Father and son making parallel approaches within 24 hours. Too coordinated to be coincidental, I agreed. They're either testing our alignment or looking for vulnerabilities in our partnership. Or both, Darius added. The question is, what's their actual objective? Simply to gain access to our development model, or something more? That's what we need to determine, I said. I suggested a joint meeting, all four of us together. Maximum transparency, minimum opportunity for manipulation. Wise approach, he approved. I'll contact Zephyr and propose it. Wednesday morning at Nautilus? Neutral ground for both parties, since it's neither Merit Ventures nor Blackwood. Territory. Perfect, I agreed. As we ended the call, I reflected on how naturally we'd fallen into a collaborative approach to this potential challenge. No power struggles, no unilateral decisions, no withholding of information, just mutual respect and shared strategy. The contrast with our dynamic a year earlier could hardly have been more stark. The joint meeting with the Blackwoods would be a test, not just of their intentions, but of the strength of the partnership Darius and I had built. Whatever their agenda, we would face it united, each bringing our unique perspective and experience to the table. And if their goal was to exploit any lingering discord between us, they would discover that the woman once dismissed as worthless now stood as an equal partner in an enterprise rapidly gaining industry recognition. That the supposed weakness they might have hoped to leverage had transformed into our greatest strength, the balanced perspective that only intergenerational collaboration could provide. 3 months later, I stood at the podium during the Heritage Spire's grand opening. The morning sunlight gleamed off the modern tower rising elegantly above the restored Harrington building. Hundreds of people gathered, city officials, preservationists, and proud community members who had fought to protect their architectural heritage. As I scanned the crowd, my eyes found Darius standing in the front row, Imara beside him, her hand resting on her now prominent baby bump. The journey that had brought us here, from bitter estrangement to successful partnership, felt almost dreamlike in its improbable arc. The structure before us represents more than steel and glass, I said into the microphone. It embodies the principle that we need not sacrifice our history to embrace our future. That wisdom and innovation, when properly balanced, create something greater than either could alone. I could see Darius nodding slightly, a quiet acknowledgement of our shared philosophy. After the ceremony, as the crowd dispersed toward the reception, Darius approached with a small velvet box. A gift, he said simply. For today. Inside was an elegant silver brooch shaped like the Heritage Spire, with a small inscription on the back. To the foundation that makes all else possible. It's beautiful, I said, genuinely touched. I was wrong, you know, he admitted quietly. What I said that day in my office, about your approach being worthless. I pinned the brooch to my lapel, smiling. I know. How can I ever make it up to you? He asked. You already have, I replied, looking up at the building that symbolized our reconciliation, by proving that neither of us was entirely right or entirely wrong. We needed each other's perspective all along. Darius nodded, understanding passing between us like a current. To balance, he said softly. To balance, I agreed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.